Costa Rica Real Estate podcast and all things real estate and Costa Rica. And today we're joined once again by Todd Cutter, managing broker of Costa Rica Real Estate. How are you doing today, Todd?
I'm doing fantastic. And yourself?
Doing pretty well, pretty good as well.
Excellent. Great to be back.
Yeah, well, it's been a while actually.
It's been a long time. I've been enjoying listening to all the other podcasts from the other agents across the country, and nice to be back to have a chat with you.
And today our chat will be focused on Guanacaste's development over time.
Okay.
And perhaps to start off the podcast, I wanted to ask you, or touch base on Guanacaste's historical standing in Costa Rica. Because actually, when I was talking with your brother Scott a couple of weeks ago in our Manuel Antonio podcast, he mentioned how initially Ticos preferred to go to Guanacaste for vacation, even though it was way a longer trip. Like the infrastructure made it like Tamarindo and Playa del Coco initially, the tourist hotspot in the country when it comes to beach destinations. How was that when you arrived in Costa Rica? Also, to see that transition from these former fisher towns, then local hotspots into a place that foreigners also wanted to be there.
Yeah, great question, and certainly I share the comments of my brother. You know, I remember when we first opened our first office in Manuel Antonio, and I'm sure Scott touched on this in that podcast, but we always tried to talk to our Costa Rican clients about revisiting and rediscovering the Central Pacific coast, the Jaco, Manuel Antonio, Dominical. Oh no, I've got to go to Guanacaste, it's so much closer, when in reality it was much further away distance-wise. I think there has always been for Costa Ricans this tie to Guanacaste, this sense of, call it pride, call it just a tighter connection. I think Costa Ricans that live in the Central Valley have always felt this very tight connection with the province of Guanacaste. They call it the Gold Coast. The beaches in Guanacaste tend to have a little bit more of light color sand, and have just always been an attraction for Costa Ricans. I think the big change, and you mentioned your question about, how did things move from a small fisherman's town like the case of Tamarindo into what they are today? And we've talked a lot in many of our other podcasts about the pandemic and what that did for real estate in general in Costa Rica. But I think Guanacaste, the trigger point that really moved the needle for Guanacaste was the opening of the Liberia airport, turning that into an international airport. When you can take clients flying from any part of the world, getting off of a plane from anywhere from 3 to 6 hours on a flight, if they don't have a connection, and then get them to the beach within an hour, hour and a half, it really changes the dynamic. And that's exactly what happened when the Daniel Oliver airport opened up in Liberia for international flights. It started to trickle. I think Delta was one of the first airlines that started operations up there, and then obviously United and American and everyone else really followed suit over the years. And it just opened up an extremely unique opportunity for Guanacaste. Obviously, the area is known for its beautiful beaches and a plethora of beaches to choose from. Each little town offers a different vibe, a different feeling, but I really just think that the proximity and convenience to the airport is really what opened the floodgates, so to speak. Just as the Central Pacific has the advantage of being close to the Juan Santa Maria airport and to San Jose for people to get convenient access, the international market really opened up for Guanacaste with the opening of that airport.
It's also very interesting to think about the story behind many of these now established destinations. The initial advent of tourists were at least thinking of the Nicoya Peninsula and some parts of Guanacaste was more kind of a surfer, backpacker kind of demographic. So it's also interesting to me to see how those perhaps trailblazers in terms of establishing little hostels or their own restaurants. Then started to see a wider community of expats and foreigners coming to these areas. How do you see that also turning these niche and very specific kind of destinations into something for wider appeal and then eventually becoming luxury as well?
Yeah, great point. I mean, you take a town like Tamarindo, it's a great example. Tamarindo, when I came here 26 years ago, Tamarindo was, yes, an old fisherman's town, but had since become famous for its surfing. It became famous for its surfing, much in part due to an old film that Robert August put together called The Endless Summer, where him and his buddies, that was Wingnut and Robert August, came down and filmed this show about the endless summers and the offshore breezes in this sleepy little fisherman now surf town. And as you mentioned, during that time, there were small restaurants and boutique small cabins and smaller hotels. As the surfing demographic changed from the backpackers, those backpackers aged, those backpackers became successful, those backpackers continued to surf and have children and had expendable income, but always wanted to come back to the place that they knew as this epic adventure and this endless summer. And so I think you saw so many return visitors that came to Costa Rica. And at the end of the day, what drives that luxury demand? The willingness of people to pay, the willingness of people to pay a higher price, and the desire of people to want more luxurious accommodations to stay perhaps for a longer period of time, which drove an opportunity for many hoteliers to open up new hotels, expand on hotels, remodel hotels, and create a unique source of accommodations for a different demographic, a different profile of buyer who, while their demographic was different, their economic capacity perhaps was different, but their desire to experience this authentic town in Costa Rica was the same as the guys that are still spending $20 to $60 a night on a small cabin just to get into town. These guys might be spending $200 to $400 a night because they still want to go to the same place. It hasn't changed their perception of the destination that they yearn for. And so I think, inevitably in tourism, as tourism grows, opportunity grows for the local market to adapt to that tourism and to that increased demand. You go into towns like Tamarindo, like Flamingo, like Conchal, like Potrero, and you don't just see the local soda or the local restaurant, as it's called in Costa Rica, where they serve the gallo pinto and the casados. You'll find the international cuisine. You'll find an Italian restaurant, the pizzeria, a Peruvian restaurant, an Argentinian place that sells empanadas and steaks, perhaps a Venezuelan place that might sell tequeños. And so you really get this broad reach of international impact and people who have come to the area to enjoy a certain lifestyle, and they've opened up businesses to be able to afford the lifestyle that they really yearn to live.
And as you mentioned, like this diversification of demographics and different kind of profiles and experiences has also come in the expansion of what were originally thought of like this the destinations of Guanacaste to be. So we've also seen how adjacent communities and perhaps a little more like off-the-grid experiences became also available to a different kind of tourism or different kind of investors, but also kind of like rearrange the idea of what Guanacaste was, because to many people, at least for many years, it was just like, oh yeah, I can go to Papagayo, Tamarindo, or perhaps like Potrero for those more adventures. But nowadays, there's like a plethora of options.
Exactly. And again, like anywhere in the world, as tourism grows, and particularly in a place like Costa Rica, where people are willing to rent a car and go out and adventure on their own, it is not a typical tourism that you may see, for example, in the Dominican Republic, which is more focused on all-inclusive resorts and all-encompassing areas where people go and kind of shelf it there for the entire week. Costa Rica really is all about the adventure, and I think that's what is so exciting to people that come here. Even back to the reference I made to the endless summer, part of that adventure was getting into a car and driving all over the country and crossing rivers to find new surf spots. And while it's certainly less remote as it once appeared, that drive still exists. And the people that come to stay in Conchal or Flamingo or Potrero or Playa Grande or Tamarindo or Avellanas, They want to get in the car and adventure out and go see new places, because it's one of the unique things about Costa Rica is that you can do so. It's a safe place to travel. People feel very comfortable doing so and pulling off on the side of the road and eating at whatever restaurant they find along the way. The friendly people, the ticos, I think, are one of the main factors that drive people to come back to Costa Rica. And so, to your point, a decade ago or 15 years ago, you think about a place like Playa Negra or Avellanas or even a Playa Grande that were really off the beaten path, trailblazer type destinations. And if you said, I'm going to go buy a place in Avellanas 10 years ago, people are like, whoa, you're really pushing it. That place is so remote. Distance wise, it's 5 kilometers maybe from Hacienda Pinilla, or another 5 kilometers from Tamarindo, but the perception of its location always felt so remote. And this growth, both in tourism as well as the parallel growth in the investment opportunities, obviously, like anywhere in the world, starts to expand from its core, which started, if we think about that Tamarindo area, which, if you encompass the area like Playa Grande, Tamarindo, Hacienda Pinilla, Avellanas, Negra, all the way down towards the Junquillal area, those southernmost areas and Grande to the north were always considered really off the beaten path. And now they're not at all, not just because there's development opportunities there, but I think the comfort level that people have to buy a place there, whether it's to rent an Airbnb or to live there half of the year, part of the year, or even full time, which we've seen a lot of increase over the past few years. The sense of proximity to grocery stores, restaurants, other amenities has changed. Avellanas 15 years ago, you couldn't get a cold beer with the exception of a couple of hotels, maybe Cabina Las Olas and a couple other places. Now you're starting to see smart and slow organic commercial growth to support the residential growth that's taking place in there. There's some really nice developments taking place in the Avellanas area, in addition to single family residents that have been built in and around the area. You've got developments like the Enclave, like Numandi, like Ave Moana, that are really starting to pop up to provide that profile of buyer who tends to be someone who wants access and convenience to get into Tamarindo if and when they want it, but they don't want to be in the middle of that town. They're not so much into the nightlife. They want surfing, really, is the driving factor, which is something that really hasn't changed. If you think about what made Tamarindo what it is today, it started with surfing. That's really what drove tourism. It's what drove the early investors into Tamarindo that wanted to own a place there, was because of the great surfing, the warm waters, no wetsuit, offshore breeze. And that really hasn't changed, and it continues to drive the market. And now it's just driven it outside of the core of Tamarindo into areas like Playa Grande, which, because there's a turtle nesting ground there's limited development, so it means their waves are not very crowded. You go south towards Pinilla, towards Avellanas, you've got great breaks there like Little Hawaii and others down to Negra. And people that want to be in Avellanas, they want to walk to the beach. They want to have that bohemian lifestyle where they wake up in the morning, walk down to the beach, or get on their quad and go down to the beach and surf for a few hours, then come back and have a fresh smoothie, a breakfast burrito. And now those are options. Now there are small commercial places there that are catering to that type of client. And so it's interesting to watch that growth and watch the growth adapt to, in each destination, a different profile. The type of services, the type of commercial amenities that are available in Flamingo, which is more of a high-end boating and yachting destination in addition to a beautiful beach, as opposed to what you see in Avellanas or a Playa Grande, which are driven much more by surf. It's interesting to watch how savvy entrepreneurs, most of them locals or expats that are living locally in those communities, are adapting and understanding who their demographics are and really building around who the people are that make up that community, and who the people are that are coming to those communities and are attracted by that lifestyle.
Yeah, actually, I was just about to ask you about that because, as you mentioned, there's like very specific lifestyles, kind of like atmospheres for each different destination in Guanacaste. And my question was about how does each development adapts to these new market demands? As you mentioned, there's a balance between safekeeping the initial reason why people came to these areas, and also offering like perhaps a wider comfort to accommodate like varying degrees of like socioeconomic demographics.
Sure. I think one of the great things about the real estate market taking dips before it rises is it really educates developers and it helps to wipe out perhaps some of the more novice, inexperienced developers. And what I mean by that is, prior to the crash in the financial crash in 2008, the real estate market was so hot here that everybody was a real estate developer. And so everybody would buy a piece of land and go hire the first architect they could find and, run a spreadsheet and figure out where they could make money, how they could make money, and go with it. When the market crashed after 2008, it taught, unfortunately, many of those people the hard way that you can't just buy and build. You really have to be methodical from a developer's perspective and understand who your target is, understand who the demographics are, understand what really motivates a buyer in a specific development to want to be there, to want to invest their hard-earned dollars to either, buy to rent or to live there full time. And so I think what you're seeing now is a different level of development. I think developers are taking great care to look at the markets that they're buying land in, understanding the demographics of the people who want to be there, and building a product that makes sense. Both financially for that particular segment, but beyond the financial side of things, that just makes sense from a motivation standpoint, right? Buyers come into the marketplace and they have a lot to choose from, right? No different than anywhere else in the world. Costa Rica has built a much more diversified portfolio, of opportunities for investors. And if you look at an investor who comes to Costa Rica and wants to retire here, he has a yacht or a boat and loves to fish, they're going to be drawn obviously to the Flamingo Marina, or perhaps if they want to go further south down into Marina Pezuela or Los Sueños. But if we're talking Guanacaste, they're going to be drawn to Flamingo. That type of buyer tends to be accustomed to a certain level of lifestyle, not just from a financial perspective, but the type of amenities that they want, the restaurants and the services that they need to stock their boat every day before they go out fishing, someone to make the sandwiches and stock the cooler with beers and soft drinks and things of that nature. Whereas the family who's coming down and they're motivated because the husband and wife both surf, their kids surf, and they want to have this experience to pass on from generation to generation of a home in Costa Rica where they feel comfortable, they feel safe, and it's driven really by this more bohemian inspiration to slow down their pace of life, to get away perhaps, other than the confines of their home, from all of the comfort creatures that they might come from in Huntington Beach or wherever they may be coming from in the U.S. If that same product was designed for the Flamingo Marina buyer, was developed, for example, in Avellanas or Playa Grande, it would fail. Because the motivation is different, the appeal is different, many times the architecture is different, the supporting commercial amenities may be different. And so I think so far, from what I've seen, 2020 with the pandemic to date, you're starting to really get developers who are taking great care to look at the market before they make mistakes. They're really paying attention to what the buyers want and need to try to build a product that really accommodates that.
And now that you mentioned that, also with the pandemic, as you mentioned, something we've touched upon on different podcasts, you've now also seen like rental investments as a big part of like the real estate market in the Guanacaste area. In a way, the idea of like the prosumer in media, which is like the producer and consumer, kind of applies in a way to like the real estate market. Someone that is a client when they buy the property, but then also become the kind of like a micro developer because they half the year, like off season, they want to rent out their own place. So have you seen like this evolution in terms of the considerations that someone takes when approaching Guanacaste? Also thinking like not only like, oh, I want this vacation home, I want to move like as an expat, but I want also to do like a business side of things.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously one of the big triggers for a lot of our clients. We have clients who, as I mentioned, come down here to retire. We have other clients who come down to have a vacation home and don't want to rent. They want to lock their house and leave it. But there is a big segment of the marketplace that we'll classify as investors who certainly want to come down and enjoy their home, and certainly will send friends down, and they will spend a good portion of the year because Costa Rica at the end of the day is what's motivating them to come here. But investment and looking at a reasonable return on their investment, whether that be appreciation over the short, medium, and long term, or of course, as you mentioned, the rentability and profitability of that asset. And so, all of our agents are very well educated and well trained in this. They hear the questions on a daily basis. And because the Guanacaste market, certainly Costa Rica as well, but because the Guanacaste market has prospered so much over the past few years and become such a hot tourist destination, so too, of course, have the prices when it comes to rentals, right? And so as hotels continue to raise their ADR or their average daily rates, condominiums, single-family homes, townhomes become a very appealing option for tourists because most of the tourists who come to Costa Rica don't come by themselves. They come either accompanied with friends or with family or with multiple families, and so larger places tend to make more sense, not only because they can go into one house and be able to share space, but they can cook and they can entertain and they can end up spending more time than they would, for example, at a hotel together. And so that has generated a tremendous opportunity for buyers to come in and buy in unique communities that provide an experience for those tourists, provide security for those tourists so that they feel comfortable coming in and renting a home like that, provide service for them. Many of those luxury rental homes will offer everything from concierge services to private chefs that can come in and cook, tour opportunities. And so as you mentioned, the micro entrepreneur, if you will, who is a buyer, who develops a home, which becomes a product to then rent out to the public, is creating also opportunity in the marketplace, not just for themselves and their investment, but creating unique opportunities. And I think one of the things that we're seeing now is in a trending manner is because of the abundance of those buyers who've come to the marketplace to try to get involved in the rental market. You're seeing a lot more creativity from the buyers and micro entrepreneurs who are developing a home or a condo or a townhome. Okay, what will distinguish my product? What will make my home more attractive to the renters that come to Costa Rica and that come to Pinillo or Tamarindo or Conchal versus the other homes here? And so, like everything in the world, competition in this sense is a good thing because it's creating really new and innovative homes and places to stay for tourists that come to Costa Rica, which in the end will continue to drive more tourism because people will say, wow, I stayed in this phenomenal place. Check out the pictures of this home I just stayed in. I couldn't believe it. It had an internal garden and it had a jacuzzi and it had a cold water plunge pool and it had this amazing bunk room and it had surf racks and all of these different bells and whistles, if you want to call it that, or just amenities that again are geared specifically towards that market. Again, if you were in a fishing market, maybe the amenities or the things that they would have in that home or the apartment would be different than the surfers. And so it's exciting to watch that. It's exciting to watch architects get inspired by the continued demand. It's exciting to see clients come to Costa Rica who perhaps have experience in other very competitive markets and bring new ideas to the table, which I think just makes the Costa Rican real estate market more dynamic.
Perhaps to round out the podcast, I want to ask you perhaps of a newer, not really like a newer development, but more in general, like a newer trend we've seen with the announcement of like finally the advent of like the ultra luxury realm in terms of like the Guanacaste area, just in like the one and only, the Wall of Astoria, like this range that historically hasn't been really in Costa Rica, like the multi-thousand like daily rates for like hotel stays and like 10 plus, 15 plus $1 million homes. How do you see the advent of like this kind of like upper echelon of like
Sure.
real estate and its relationship to what everything we've touched upon right now?
Yeah, it's a great question, and inevitably when you talk Guanacaste, this is going to come up, right? Because it is a very new topic. It started with the opening many years ago, the Four Seasons up in the Papagayo Peninsula, which was really the first 5-star resort that had opened in Costa Rica that brought things to a completely different level. Just before the financial crash of 2008, you saw every day you opened up the newspaper the announcement of a new 5 or 6 star resort that was going to come. The announcements were made, the flags were up, the financial crash hit, and all of that kind of crumbled down. You're now seeing again one and only the Waldorf, the Ritz Reserve, the Four Seasons, Six Senses, and many others who are rumored to be here, others who are certainly on the map. It has brought a completely different demographic to Costa Rica. For the most part, most of the buyers and visitors to these properties would probably not have come to Costa Rica had it not been for these flagged hotel operations. They tend to be buyers, obviously uber wealthy buyers who come, and they come because of a sense of loyalty to those brands. You know, a Ritz buyer here probably owns a Ritz in Colorado or a Ritz somewhere else around the world, just like a Waldorf buyer might own other Waldorf properties, and they get there is just truly a sense of this brand loyalty that brings them here. And so I get asked the question, is that diluting the market? Is it creating competition in the marketplace? And I would say, yes, it creates competition amongst those brands. But when you look at the prices on the product at the Discovery, at the Ritz, at the Four Seasons, and these developments, you know, many of them are 2 to 3 times the price per square foot that non-branded residents in many of these other areas that we mentioned are. And so it's not necessarily a competitive product. It's in a league of its own, if you will, and it's bringing a buyer demographic that's new to Costa Rica. And so I think that's been fantastic for tourism, because obviously the hotel rates at those hotels are on par with that multiple that I mentioned as far as superior to the other hotels in the area. It's bringing a new demographic to Costa Rica to experience what has made Costa Rica so great. And what has made Costa Rica so great in my own humble personal experience of being an expat here for 26 years is, yes, the natural beauty, the diversity, flora, fauna, all of these amazing things that you can explore in Costa Rica, from the beaches to the volcanoes. We touched earlier on the people, right? The people of Costa Rica, the Costa Ricans really make Costa Rica unique. You can find luxury accommodations and beaches in a lot of places in the world, but if you don't have people that are welcoming and warm to the guests, no one wants to return. And I think the final piece of what has made Costa Rica great and what's unique about those ultra luxury hotel properties and investment properties is that, again, people want to get out and explore Costa Rica. You know, even if you're staying at a Waldorf or a Ritz or a Four Seasons, people want to see the volcano. They want to go see the Monteverde cloud forest. They want to go adventure off, and then they want to go creep back into their, you know, their 6-star luxury experience with catered service, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? And I think it's a great plus for Costa Rica to have kind of that myriad of diversity when it comes to both tourism and investment opportunities.
Yeah, and it's really like when you see it, like in terms of like when people buy a property or like even like when they decide where to stay, it's usually thought of like as a hub to explore the rest of the area. So I think that's also like very unique, particularly Guanacaste, but also Costa Rica in general.
Absolutely.
And with that, I want to thank you, Todd, once again for coming to the podcast and sharing your valuable insights with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on here today. It's always a pleasure, Alonso.
Thanks for coming again. And if you like the conversation, you can check all our backlog of podcasts at To Costa Rica Real Talk, and follow us on social media at To Costa Rica Real Estate on every platform.